How to pace your D&D Pathfinder game today on Dungeon Craft. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor Dungeonmaster, and this channel is about playing the ultimate game of D&D. Level up your game by subscribing and click the bell icon so you'll be informed when we upload new videos every Thursday. So I've gotten a lot of questions lately about pacing, like how I pace my game so that it's balanced between combat and roleplay, investigation, and so on and so forth. And is there a secret Dungeon Craft formula that I use to entertain my players? And the answer is no. It's personalized to those players. I've had players that just like playing combat, and they played a very militaristic campaign where it was just 3 hours of non-stop fighting. And then I played other games where it was a mystery or it was a role-playing scenario where there was no combat at all. So it depends on your group, and it also depends on the game you're playing. I'm assuming most of you are playing D&D, but if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, that game has a much more leisurely pace as players collect clues and figure out the mystery. And a game like Paranoia is a fight could just break out between the player characters at any moment. So every game has its own cadence and pace. But I do have some ideas to keep your game paced so that it entertains your players no matter what genre or game system you're using. So this video is going to have 3 parts. 1, plotting out the scenario. 2, reading your players. And 3, avoiding common choke points when it comes to pacing. I have this book, Hamlet's Hit Points by Robin D. Laws. If you're not familiar with Robin Laws, he is a prolific game designer and also a writer of Warhammer novels. This book is all about plotting your role-playing game, and he approaches the role-playing games much the way I do, which as a dramatic exercise. And he breaks down 3 plots: Hamlet, Casablanca, and the first James Bond film, Dr. No, into beats, which is quite a feat for Hamlet because Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play. It's performed uncut, it would be 4 hours long. So almost every production cuts something from it. But Robin Laws has taken it scene by scene and broken down every single scene. And his premise is that drama works by manipulating 2 powerful human emotions: hope and fear. Hope is an upbeat, fear is a downbeat. Now, it's a little more complex than that with procedural beats and dramatic beats and so forth. But that's the basic schema, and what you try to do as a Dungeon Master is alternate between these 2 beats. So for example, the characters kick in a door and they fight a monster and they're fearful because they're afraid their characters are going to die and they're losing hit points. But then they defeat the monster and that hope returns, and then they, having killed it, they look into, they try to pick the monster's treasure chest, and they're hoping that there's a magic item or a treasure inside. And that's what you want to do. You want to alternate between these 2 emotions. It's a little more complex than that with dramatic beats and procedural beats, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through a recent adventure that I've already mentioned before, I think on the Villains episode. And I'm just going to show you my outline for it and how I alternate between these 2 beats, hope and fear. And hope is going to be highlighted in green, and the fear beats are going to be highlighted in yellow. So we start with a fear beat. The characters are subject to an inquest, and they're being interrogated by Minister Payne, who is a religious fanatic and advisor to the local ruler. And the reason they're being grilled is because their last adventure was to essentially rescue the princess, but they failed. And now the Minister Payne is using this as an excuse to blame wizards whom he hates. And one of the player characters, as it would happen, is a wizard, Natasha. And she hasn't bothered to show up for this inquest because she quite rightly figures she'll be burned as a witch. So she has stayed away, and she's being tried in absentia. So the characters aren't being convicted of the crime itself, but they have to rehash the events of the last adventure as they perceived it, and Minister Payne manipulates it to make them look like they're incompetent and Natasha look like she had a hand in killing the princess. So this is a definite downbeat. Next, Natasha tracks Alexa, her cousin, who's also a wizard, and she's also hiding out, and she hasn't seen her for several weeks. She tracks Alexa to a secret wizard safe house and find Alexa's music box, and in it there's a secret reveal. There's a secret letter that reveals that Natasha had always thought Alexa was her cousin, but in fact they are long-lost sisters. So this is an upbeat because the player, Veronica, who's really into role-playing, it's a reward. It's not a treasure reward, but it's a role-playing reward, which to Veronica is tangible as moving up an experience level. Also, Natasha meets up with another character, Develle, who tells her that Alexa was taken by a mob and dragged off, but is still alive somewhere in the city. So that's an upbeat too, because it's hopeful. 3. Minister Payne meets with Holger. One of the player characters is the commander of the Watch, and Minister Payne charges him, gives him orders to find Natasha and bring her back to justice or else. Now, Holger has an extensive family, tons of children and a wife, and Minister Payne insinuates that it'd be a shame if he wasn't able to complete his mission and they might suffer for it. So now Holger is torn between fulfilling his obligation to the government, which is his job, and torn between that and hunting down his friend. So that's a downbeat. In scene 4, the player characters, Holger, Natasha, Develle, etc., are united, and they locate a secret prison where Alexa is being held and trick their way inside, an upbeat. Scene 5 is a guard room, so they have to fight the guards, and whenever you have a fight, that is a downbeat, because there's always the chance that you may be injured. 6, having killed the guards, they rescue a prisoner who informs them that Alexa is alive and in the dungeon somewhere. Scene 7, another guard room, another downbeat. It's even tougher than the previous room, and the characters are now losing spells and resources and hit points, etc. But 8, they rescue Melchior, a powerful wizard, who dies, but he reveals that Alexa is in the very next room, so it's still an upbeat. 9 is the climax, and the characters find Alexa shackled to the wall, and also there's a mountain of gunpowder and barrels, and Minister Payne reveals the twist. He was only luring Natasha down into the dungeon so he could blow it up and kill all wizards once and for all. So this is a downbeat, and it's a really tough fight. But at the very last second, the characters manage to rescue Alexa and flee the dungeon just as it explodes and collapses, an upbeat. If you alternate between upbeats and downbeats, that is the secret to your session having flow. It's not about having a combat encounter and then an investigation encounter and a role-playing encounter. That's helpful, but these beats are even more important. That's why you can have a really intriguing Call of Cthulhu session, which is all mystery with no combat, and everyone's on the edge of their seats. If you want to check out a great adventure, Statue of the Sorcerer, I've mentioned it before. It was a joint product between Games Workshop and Chaosium. The players during the course of this adventure don't roll a single die, yet it is filled with tension, and there's no combat involved. And we've all played those sessions where combats just seem to drag and take forever. So it's not a matter of alternating, say, between combat and role-playing or problem-solving as much as introducing a problem, a complication, having the player characters resolve it, that is the hope, and then, but it leads to another complication, which is the fear, and that cycle just keeps repeating itself. Now, before we get to the next part, reading your players, do me a favor and please, if you enjoyed this content, share this video. YouTube has recently changed its algorithm and it is not favorable to independent content creators. That's why I and a bunch of your other favorite YouTubers are probably saying the same thing. Please share these videos. It's the best way to promote the channel. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the many patrons on Patreon who have made this video possible. And if you really dig my work and you want to see more of it, the links to Patreon are below. So on to the next pacing element, reading your players. Reading your players is the ability to look into your players' eyes and see where they're all at with your game. Are they all engaged? Are they all involved? That's why I actually prefer not to sit at the head of a long rectangular table. I prefer to sit in the middle of the table with the players around me, and I really prefer a round table. I like being able to look at my players at all times, just make eye contact, and I think too many DMs do this, right? During the course of the game, looking stuff up instead of doing this, what I'm doing now, looking directly into your eyes, engaging whether everybody is engaged. Now, if one of your players looks bored, you need to be able to identify what type of player they are, and then have something like, if they're a role-playing type player, you need to have a role-playing encounter right away. Most often it's because people are itching for a combat encounter. I mean, there are those players that get bored after a while. And that's the easiest problem to solve. I solve it with what I call the Raymond Chandler rule. Raymond Chandler was a great mystery writer, and he had a rule that if the action starts dragging, have a man with a gun enter the room, and then figure out why he's there later. I think that's a great technique for Dungeons & Dragons. That is when wandering monsters attack. Maybe it's mistaken identity and they're really going to end up an ally of the player characters, or maybe it's just the bad guy has sent some minions to attack the player characters, something to shake them up and to engage them. That's primarily the way I use wandering monsters. Another tip is to keep a flow chart. So you don't have to keep flipping through either your notes or the scenario notes. I talk about this in an earlier video, I'll include a link to it at the end, about stop flipping through rule books. But essentially it can be as simple as, okay, you have the guard room at the top and the Hall of Skeletons over here and the Chamber of Doom over here. And if the player characters choose to go there, you know it's there. That's why I don't like numbers on maps. I don't know why they're not labeled Chamber of Doom so that I can remember what it's supposed to be in it and where everything is in relation to everything else. Now, the key with mysteries is to imagine each scene as its own room, and instead of hallways connecting them, there are clues connecting them. You go from Miskatonic University to the Miskatonic Museum of Art, or you can go to the Old Marsh House. But it's the same concept. You're going from one place to another, and then once you're in that place, it branches off to other places. That way, you can look at your flow chart and instantly know where you are as a DM in your own scenario and how the players can get to the other parts that are connected. Another tip is to rehearse descriptions and especially long speeches. I mean, you're an actor, you're playing a role. If you were playing King Lear, you would certainly rehearse it. Right, so it's the same thing with your major villains. I know my neighbors, they think I'm crazy because I generally walk around the neighborhood talking to myself in the warmer months because I'm rehearsing scenes from my role-playing games. One of my neighbors pulled alongside me in the wintertime on the highway, and I'm like, motioning like this, and I was either preparing to teach Julius Caesar, like, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, or I was playing some sort of villain. That's where I practice. If I'm driving to work by myself, I generally rehearse these things. And it makes me look crazy. But then when the actual game comes, I'm not searching for words. I find when DMs play non-player characters, if they pause for too long searching for words, the players either insert themselves by either asking questions because they think the DM is done, or inserting jokes there and breaking the tension and making the Dungeon Master lose their spot. So it is a wise idea to look at every NPC as a role you have to play and rehearse it so that it's pretty tight by the time the game comes. Some people have been very kind after I've Dungeonmaster, they say, wow, you're so good at playing these NPCs with these accents and so on and so forth. I can't do that in my game. Actually, everyone can. It just takes a lot of practice. And I would say I spend, for every hour that my players spend at the table, I'm spending 1 or 2 hours preparing for that. And rehearsing the roles of the non-player characters is one of the things I do. And finally, with reading your players, I think it's better if you end the game too soon than go on too long. Like if you see your players are yawning and their interest is starting to flag, maybe it's best that you just cap the session. Just have one last final fight and then say to myself, okay, well, I thought we were going to be done, but I'm just going to split this into 2 separate sessions. That's probably a better way to go than things going on too long. I find with movies, with these superhero movies and stuff, I don't know how everybody else feels. Like they're way too long. It's just like 20 minutes could be cut. And a lot of it is the fighting, which we're going to get to in a second. But yeah, better to exit and end the game with the players wanting more and wishing it continued than just having it drag on. Now let's talk about common choke points. And the choke points a lot of times have to do with the rules. The weird thing about D&D is just when it should be getting fast and exciting, when combat happens, it slows down into Matrix bullet time. Now, I've caught a lot of crap on this channel because I've suggested different ways of doing initiative that the DM, the official 5E method is too long. And I just want to add a caveat. If you're playing with 2, 3, or 4 players, it's fine the way it is. It only takes a moment. But if you're playing like 6, 7, or 8 players like I do, the idea of everyone rolling initiative and sorting it out and putting little clips on your DM screen and be like, okay, it's you, now it's you, it's you, now I'm going back to here. That jumping around, I don't know how a Dungeon Master does it. I have a controversial video about ditching initiative altogether. And the funny thing is, when people adapt that, no one has told me, you know what, we tried it and we hated it. Everyone who tries it seems to like it. But I realize it's a very radical solution for most Dungeon Masters, especially if you're new. So this is what I would recommend. Go to group initiative. Just straight up, each side rolls a 20-sided die. Highest roll wins, and the players take their turn clockwise around the table. Five Torches Deep has an initiative system, which is cool. It's players act in order of their dexterity. And that's cool because you could just sit them in dexterity order, again, clockwise around you. As a Dungeon Master, it's just far easier to keep track of. And although some people say, well, initiative doesn't really take that long, next time you play with your players, hit a timer on your phone and see how long it takes. It probably takes longer than you think it does. But if you've got a big group, initiative is a choke point, and there are easy alternatives to solve that problem. Another house rule, no looking up feats or spells when the game is in session. Look, players, your Dungeon Master does a lot of work to prep for the session. You've got to update your character sheet, and it's your business, if you've got a magic missile spell, to know the duration and the distance of a magic missile spell. If there's a situation in the game where you don't know if that magic missile, is that orc out of range, and the Dungeon Master asks you if it's in range and you don't know, then it's totally proper of the Dungeon Master to just say, okay, well, I'm going to rule it's out of range for now. Because it's your job to know the spell, right? It's their job to keep the game moving. And if you're not prepared, you're taking away valuable time from the other players. So if you're a player, do prepare. And Dungeon Masters, don't be afraid if you don't know whatever bonus, armor class bonus, partial cover gives, or the duration of a spell. Just make it up, resolve it, and look it up after the game is over. Keep the game moving. It's very rare that you're going to make a decision that's going to kill the player character unjustly, and you can always say, oh, I screwed up, and bring him back to life. Like, you can do that. It's better to keep the game moving because nothing damages the pace more than stopping everything to look up a rule. Another tip, consider lowering the armor class of monsters so the players can hit them. You know what I'm talking about if you've ever gotten into one of these fights where he misses and then he misses and she misses and everybody missed and it happens 3 rounds in a row. That can be really frustrating as a player because you feel like you're not making progress. And I learned years ago that it's better to lower the monster's armor class and give them more hit points because when the player characters damage the monsters, they feel that hope that it can be defeated, right? It feels like they're making progress. And also lowering hit points. If you watch movies, Conan or Legolas, they kill monsters in just like one shot. If your players reduce the orc to 1 hit point, just say it's dead and make them feel cool that they killed it and move on. This is especially true for guard rooms or just your average minions, not the main villain of the story. The main villain, you want it to go for a certain length. It has to go for a certain length to be satisfying. But again, lower his armor class. I think the combats will be more fun that way. Now, if you like this video, give it the thumbs up and share it. Questions, comments, or your own suggestions for improving the pace of your games, put them below. Link to our Facebook group is also below, and there are tons of great people on there, folks giving advice on crafting and painting miniatures and running games, and do consider joining that. This has been Professor Dungeon Master for Dungeon Craft. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next Thursday, and until then, may all your rolls be 20s.